Hello and welcome back to the Thecrimereel. For this week's true crime story, we shall be looking at the many crimes of Jeffrey Shuman, also known as both the Reebok Bandit and the Vaulter. Jeffrey James Shuman was born in 1962 in Los Angeles County, California. His maternal grandmother was originally from France and had moved to the US with her husband and 2-year-old daughter in 1946 following the end of the Second World War. Jeffrey's birth was registered with the French Consulate General and he had dual citizenship to both the US and France. After completing high school, he decided against attending college, instead joining the US Navy and then studying fashion merchandising before taking a job in banking when he was in his early 20s. In the early 1990s, Jeffrey moved to Miami, where he set up his own business as a self-employed land developer. Despite not selling anything for over 3 years, Jeffrey maintained an extremely extravagant lifestyle. He would frequently travel overseas, spending time in the United Kingdom, Spain, France, and the Bahamas to name but a few. Jeffrey rented a luxury condo overlooking the marina at Biscayne Bay in Miami, having reportedly secured the rental with a large upfront cash payment. On July 12, 1993, Jeffrey was driving across Alabama in a rented Plymouth Acclaim. He was pulled over for speeding, and during a routine search of his car, under the spare tyre, police found an air pistol, plastic gloves, a police radio scanner, several baseball caps, and numerous maps of Florida, Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee. Despite this, Jeffrey only received a traffic violation and was sent on his way. However, a warrant was soon issued for Jeffrey's arrest. At around 5 p.m. on July 14, 1993, Jeffrey was visiting Dollar Rent-A-Car in Miami to extend the rental on the Plymouth Acclaim when he was arrested by the FBI for a bank robbery that had taken place 12 days earlier. So, a dozen days before, on the 2nd of July 1993, a robbery had occurred at the Leader Federal Bank of Brentwood in Nashville. As the thief tried to make their escape, a dive bomb exploded and the money had to be abandoned. Jeffrey refused to answer any questions when interviewed, immediately requesting an attorney. As the FBI investigated further, they realised that Jeffrey was in fact a prolific bank robber who had been nicknamed the Reebok Bandit, a suspect in over 20 bank robberies in the southeastern states of the US throughout 1992 and 1993. The Reebok Bandit was reported to be a handsome, professional-looking man who always hid his face under a baseball cap whilst robbing banks. His nickname came from the white Reebok tennis shoes which he wore during robberies, which were easily seen when he leapt over the counters in order to raid the cash drawers. During one of the robberies at the Citizens Federal Bank in St. Petersburg, in Florida, blood drops were found on the counter, which assisted in securing a conviction. Jeffrey was charged, and whilst detained awaiting his trial, he married his fiancée Claudia Jossman in the Indian River County Jail on 10th of May 1994. Later that year, after initially denying any involvement, Jeffrey pleaded guilty to robbing 14 banks, although he was suspected of being involved in far more robberies. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison. The maximum sentence that he could have received was 280 years. Due to his dual citizenship, he tried, unsuccessfully, to get transferred to a French prison, but instead completed his sentence in Georgia before being moved to a lower security prison in Florida towards the end of his prison term. In 2004, after serving 10 years of his sentence, Jeffrey was on supervised release when he failed to report to his probation officer. In April 2004, an arrest warrant was issued, but Jeffrey had simply disappeared. He wasn't seen again for many years. In February 2010, 6 years after Jeffrey breached his probation, a man entered a branch of the Royal Bank in a strip mall north of Toronto. He was wearing a beige Parker coat and a baseball cap. He vaulted the bank counter before holding the employees at gunpoint and stealing as much cash as he could carry. In the following 8 months, there were 10 more bank robberies in Ontario, all following the exact same MO. He was dubbed the Vaulter by the Canadian press. There was no link that could reasonably be expected to be made between these robberies and those committed by the Reebok Bandit almost 20 years earlier in the southeastern states of the US. The trail disappeared as quickly as it started. For 4 months there were no more similar bank heists. Then there was a sudden spate of robberies in Calgary, Alberta. 4 branches of the Bank of Nova Scotia were robbed within a week. Once again, these heists were completed by a lone male, fitting Jeffrey's description, who, armed with a handgun, would vault over the counter before demanding money. Again, the robberies in Calgary stopped as abruptly as they started, before the banks of Eastern Canada became a target once again. In total, over 20 banks were robbed, with nearly $500,000 Canadian dollars stolen during this period. Jeffrey's methods became bolder. Rather than entering the bank, vaulting the counter and clearing out the cash drawers, he started to lie in wait for bank employees to open their branches and then force them at gunpoint into the vault. On May 8, 2015, Jeffrey robbed a TD Canada Trust branch in Mississauga in Ontario. Canadian police appealed to the public for assistance in identifying the vaulter, and a $100,000 Canadian dollar reward was offered for information leading to his arrest. Ultimately, it was a careless mistake on Jeffrey's part that would lead to his downfall. During the 8th of May robbery at the bank in Mississauga, Jeffrey posed as a construction worker carrying a black clipboard. In his haste to leave, this clipboard was left in the vault of the bank, and from this the authorities were able to obtain a fingerprint. This fingerprint matched the one held on file for Jeffrey Shuman, and the connection was made that Jeffrey was both the Reebok Bandit and the Vaulter. The problem now was catching him. Further investigation revealed that Jeffrey had no links to Canada and was visiting the country for short periods of time to complete the robberies. Then, when he finished each job, he would return to various different locations across Europe. An international arrest warrant was issued, and during the summer of 2015, Canadian police were able to determine that Jeffrey was living in France. Due to the difficulties surrounding extraditing a French citizen from France, they were reluctant to arrest him on French soil, and so with the help of police from France, Germany, Denmark and Switzerland, they continued to track Jeffrey's movements. In September 2015, he was visiting Geneva, Switzerland for a holiday which enabled police to arrest him. Police later raided the apartment in France where he had been living and found a rubbish bag under the sink containing over €100,000. They also found a Rolex watch, which it is reported that he paid $11,000 Canadian dollars in cash for directly after one of the robberies near Toronto. On 23rd of February 2016, Jeffrey was due to be extradited to Canada from Switzerland. He boarded an Air Canada commercial flight headed for Montreal. When flying over French airspace, Jeffrey faked a heart attack in an attempt to make the plane land in France so that he could be protected from extradition. However, the plane landed in London Heathrow instead, where Jeffrey was assessed as fit to fly. No evidence of a heart problem could be found. As detectives tried to get him back on board the commercial flight to Canada, he tried to run away and had to be physically restrained, causing even more disruption to the airline and the passengers. The airline refused to allow him back on board. Eventually, the Ontario Ministry of the Attorney General had to charter a private plane costing over $100,000 Canadian dollars to get Jeffrey back onto Canadian soil. After arriving back at Toronto's Pearson Airport, Jeffrey was held in custody awaiting trial for over 30 criminal charges, including robbery and armed robbery. On Wednesday, 5th of July 2017, Jeffrey pleaded guilty to 7 charges of armed robbery, although he is presumed to have committed many more. The Crown requested a sentence of 17 years, stating that Jeffrey was a serial bank robber and with his criminal history was beyond reform. They also stated that even though no one had endured any physical injury from his crimes, the psychological impact on the victims of his robberies was extensive. However, Jeffrey's defence team were looking for a sentence of under 10 years. They stated that at no point was there a true danger of injury to any of the individuals involved, as Jeffrey had always used a pellet gun in his robberies. They also claimed that he had on more than one occasion left a bank that he had planned to rob because there were children present. On 25th of July 2017, Jeffrey was sentenced to 15 years in prison and ordered to pay 450,000 Canadian dollars in restitution. He will be eligible for parole in 2025. That concludes the story of Jeffrey Shuman. Thanks once again for listening to the story. Any comments, please add down below. I'll be interested in reading them. Thanks very much to everyone that contributed to my community post about the coronavirus. Stay safe, people. Also, I would like to thank Briefcase for recommending and suggesting that I did this case. Thank you for the recommendation, Briefcase. Thanks once again for listening to the Crime Reel. Goodbye. Psst. That's my longest psst yet. Goodbye.